1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2.
Let me tell you how it will be. There's 1 for you, 19 for me.
Eleanor Rigby picks up the rice in the church where a wedding has been. Lives in a dream.
When I wake up early in the morning, lift my head, I'm still yawning when I'm in the middle of a dream.
Each day just goes so fast. I turn around, it's past.
I wander everywhere, and if she's beside me, I know I need never care. In the town where I was born lived a man who sailed to sea, and he told us of his life in the land of submarines.
She said, you don't understand what I said. I said, no, 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 you're wrong. When I was a boy. Good day, sunshine. Good day, sunshine. Good day, sunshine. Tell me that you've got everything you want, and your bird can sing, but you don't get me. You don't get me.
Today we're taking a look at this new copy of the Beatles' 1966 album Revolver, the album that signaled quite possibly the biggest change in the band's career. See, the history of the Beatles, which has become the stuff of legends and has already been analyzed in way more detail than I could ever get into, can be broadly divided into two main periods. The mass-marketed Beatlemania years in the early 1960s, when John, Paul, George, and Ringo conquered the world with their mop-top haircuts and R&B-inspired rock, and the psychedelic flower power years of the late 1960s when the Fab Four changed what pop music could be and helped define the counterculture of the time. Between the two periods, there were a couple of albums when the band was experimenting with their style and finding a new path. The first, arguably, was Rubber Soul from 1965, and the second was this one, released August 8th, 1966. Well, there was also Yesterday and Today, but that's a Capitol reissue, so nobody cares. Revolver is often overlooked when people talk about Beatles albums, probably because it came out in a time of transition for the band, and was later overshadowed by Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and the White Album, which essentially changed what rock and pop could be. But it's really a shame that it isn't talked about, because it's such a great, energetic, and just fun album. This is the record that gave us Eleanor Rigby, Yellow Submarine, Got to Get You Into My Life, and Tomorrow Never Knows, plus several lesser-known gems. And I do say several because there are 14 tracks on this thing. Ah, the 60s, when your favorite pop acts put out 4 albums a year with 12 songs each on them. Back then, everyone worked as hard as Lil Wayne. Anyway, as you've probably guessed from the intro, the copy that I have here isn't an authentic first edition Parlophone pressing. It is a 2012 remastered stereo pressing. Now that may be a bit disappointing to some people, because when they released new editions of the Beatles albums on vinyl, the folks at Apple Records and Abbey Road Studios decided to use digitally remastered audio from 2009 as the source rather than a pure analog transfer. Now, this upset a few analog fetishists, but for the most part, people generally agree that these records preserve the sound of the original stereo records nicely, and I would agree. As you can see here, the record uses very solid 180-gram virgin vinyl, which produces very good sound without much noise or imperfections. There was a slight scuff towards the edge of side 1 when I opened it, probably done by accident at the record plant, but as it turns out this doesn't interfere very noticeably when you're listening. Overall, the sound quality is great and very faithful to the original. without sibilance or noise in the signal. The people at Abbey Road and EMI who create these Beatles reissues are known to take care for the quality of their product, and it shows here. In fact, they put a lot of work to make the record look like the original product as well. See, this has the original black Parlophone label that was used in the first release in the UK, and they've also reproduced all of the original information on the back cover, including the warning about using a stereophonic cartridge. It's really neat to read this stuff now, and I really like that they kept it because these kinds of things are part of the history of recorded music. Anyway, while this isn't as revolutionary as Sgt. Pepper, it includes almost all the elements that made Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band great. The expansive psychedelic sound style, the Indian sitars, the experimental sampling, it's all there, just mixed in with some more conventional sounds.
I mean, it has that quality because it's the follow-on, and we were just starting, I feel, to really find ourselves in the studio, what we could do, which was, over just being the four of us playing our instruments and the vocals.
But actually, that's what makes it a great transitional album between the band's two periods. It's experimental, but also grounded in the more traditional pop-rock style of the Beatles' previous work. Songs like Taxman, Here, There, and Everywhere, and Good Day Sunshine are all great singles that fit radio formats nicely. But underlying all these seemingly simple tunes is a sense of exploration and a desire to break the pop music mold. This takes the album into new territory that was probably unfamiliar to the Beatles' old fans. If someone didn't notice the changing style on Rubber Soul, they'd definitely hear it here. In fact, the sequencing of the songs seems to guide you from the more conventional tracks to the exotic. The first song, Taxman, feels like a standard rock hit and sounds more or less familiar to someone who's heard the Beatles' earlier albums. Eleanor Rigby is less conventional since it's so gloomy and deals with loneliness and death, but it still sounds like something you would have heard on the radio before. Then we get to I'm Only Sleeping, and here's where John Lennon steps in and makes everything unreal. Between the processed vocals, the instrumental tracks being played at different speeds, and the backwards guitar solo, the average casual listener wouldn't have heard anything like this before. This is one of the album's tracks where Lennon, Harrison, and the rest started using recording effects that became very widespread, but I'll mention that later. I'm Only Sleeping introduces the dreamy, surreal atmosphere that appears on several songs on the album. This atmosphere reflects the band's growing connection to the 60s counterculture and their expanded consciousness from the counterculture's drugs. Side 1 ends with She Said, a messy, psychedelic, blaring rock tune inspired by Lennon and Harrison's experiences with LSD at a party. By this point, the record has gone far beyond normal pop fare, and we the listeners have heard a new side of the Fab Four. Side 2 opens with a break from the surrealism with the McCartney love song Good Day Sunshine, which is always great for getting your morning started. McCartney wrote just about all the more traditional songs on Revolver, by the way, and that influence is one of the main things that balances the album between eras of the band. Aside from this, he also wrote and sang Here, There, and Everywhere, For No One, Eleanor Rigby, and Got to Get You Into My Life, which are all great and beautiful tracks. McCartney was also the only Beatle at the time who had never tried acid, which maybe isn't a coincidence. So after Good Day Sunshine, we get back into the psychedelic vibe with And Your Bird Can Sing, which is one of the Beatles' great anti-materialist songs and is really underrated. It combines a driving rock and roll rhythm with playful harmonies and some clever lyrics. You should hear it if you haven't before. The mind expanding continues, though, with a short ditty to Dr. Robert, who apparently was based on a real New York City doctor who would prescribe the kind of drugs people wanted very easily. George Harrison, though, only wanted to share the cosmic experience he was having with Eastern spirituality and drugs when he wrote I Want to Tell You, which is about struggling to share profound thoughts with a world that isn't usually interested. As you'd expect, it's mellow, thoughtful, and takes its time to reflect on things. But things get way more upbeat though on McCartney's hit Got to Get You Into My Life, which manages to take a nice pop tune and drive it along with an absolutely exuberant R&B brass section. It's a combination of rock and soul that fills you up with energy and makes you want to get out and do something big. No wonder Earth, Wind and Fire wanted to do a cover of it. Then, for the final song on the record, we get to what might be the Beatles' most revolutionary track, and that is Tomorrow Never Knows. This is the song where John Lennon took the sounds of a Tibetan meditation chant and fused it with the sounds of the psychedelic counterculture. And the result is one of the biggest trips in rock history. From the droning sitars mixed with pounding drums to the backwards guitar, tape effects and processed vocals, Tomorrow Never Knows defies all rock and roll conventions. And it didn't just combine styles of music, it also pioneered new and creative studio effects to make a sound that no one had ever heard before.
And it was on Revolver that, of course, we have the track Tomorrow Never Knows, which was a great innovation. And their ideas now were beginning to become much more potent in the studio. And they would start telling me what they wanted, and they would start pressing me for more ideas and more ways of translating those ideas into reality.
This song, along with I'm Only Sleeping, as I mentioned before, uses techniques like reversing guitar tracks, processing vocals, and altering the speed of various tracks in the mix to create music that could never have been made live. Songs like this helped change the way music was recorded. Before, the studio had been a place where musicians performed their music and had it mastered much the same way as it sounded live. But the work of people like George Martin changed the studio into a place where musicians could change the sound of their works creatively to create completely new sounds. I would say that the distortion, compressed vocals, and sampling you hear on Tomorrow Never Knows led to music being created like techno, electronica, industrial, and many other styles that use samples and processing heavily. So really, Revolver didn't just revolutionize the Beatles' career, it revolutionized popular music in the Western world as we know it. When they listened to this record, fans heard a transition from the mass-market pop Beatles to the flower power, Sgt. Pepper era Beatles, but they also heard a start of a new era in recorded music. This album and Sgt. Pepper made all kinds of musicians try to imitate their sounds, and those musicians ended up creating their own new sounds in the process. Now, you can always debate with people over whether or not this album is the best or one of the best in the Beatles catalog, but in the end it's of course a matter of taste. I'd say it's one of my favorites, and I'd definitely say that it's their most underrated. And I think it's pretty fair to say that if you decide to pick up a copy, you'll be getting a piece of rock music history. Well, until next time, thanks for dropping by. For best results when using this new stereophonic record, use new EMI-Tex record cleaner. The use of new EMI-Tex provides an effective means of ensuring groove cleanliness so essential to good reproduction. Its regular use will lengthen the life of the record and reduce the static charge. Available from record dealers.